Judges. And if you have your Bible, I invite you to look in Judges chapter 8, and we will be continuing with the life of Gideon. And as we gradually been reopening our church services, we are careful at the same time, be loving toward others. We don't want to promote any involuntary spread, but at the same time, we also want to love Jesus as well, and love one another. And so that's what we seek to do. We know that love is the answer. This is what we need more than anything. As we look in our world today, we look at current events, we look at rioting, we look at looting, we look at protesting, we look at what terrible thing that happened to George Floyd. It was terrible. If you see that, you know that what the world and what we need more than anything else is love. We need the love of God in our hearts, and we need to love one another as Jesus taught us to. And that's the answer. Love is the answer. Love for Jesus, love for God, and love, as he says, our neighbor as ourselves. So let's pray before we begin and look at Judges again. Father, we pray in Jesus' name that you would speak to us, Father. Speak to us prophetically. Speak to us in our hearts that only the ways that you can through your word, Father. We don't think that anything that you do is by coincidence, including the word that you speak to us through your Holy Spirit, including the passages that we read each day, and the passages we hear on Sundays, Father. It's no mistake that, Father, you bring exactly what we need to hear, because, Father, you are in control. You are sovereign. So right now, Father, we are open to what you have us here for your glory, Lord, for our edification, Father. Strengthen your people because of your love for us and our love for you, Father. Open our hearts. Anoint my lips, Father, that they may come forth the words that you have us here for your glory, Lord. Thank you, Father. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Sorry if I seem like I'm whispering, but I will not whisper, I'm sure, by the end. So last Sunday, God gave a great victory to Gideon. And he did it with just 300 men. Now, if you remember, he started off with a greater army of 32,000, but even that was paled in the comparison to what he was up against. An army of well over 120,000, outnumbered 4-1. And yet God said, that is too much. I don't want to give you victory, and yet you claim that you did it on your own. And so he pared down that army to 10,000. And even then God said it was too many. And so with the 300 men that remained, the 300 men to face the Midianite army of 120,000, God gave Gideon a great victory. And that's what we saw last Sunday. Today, we are going to see how even in a great victory that God gives us in our lives and in Gideon's life, even in victory, Gideon still did many things that led, unfortunately, to Israel and his own family's downfall. And that's a sad thing. And you're going to see that throughout Judges. I mean, you'll see a pattern here where God delivers, God brings a great deliverance, and you think the people would just permanently love Jesus, or love God, and love the Lord, their God, with all their heart, with all their soul and mind and strength, and they would just love him and not stray from him ever again. And that's just not the case. It's just not human nature. It's not our human nature. And so that's what you'll see again, that even in victory, Gideon does many things that will lead to Israel's downfall and to his own family's downfall. And it's a cautionary tale for all of us who are God's people even today. Now, when Gideon went up to battle against the armies of Midian with only 300 men, God gave them that great victory. Look at Judges chapter 7, verse 22. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Beersheba toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel, Meholah, and Baal-Tabath. And so it says, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade. The Lord gave them the victory, causing the Midian army to panic so much that they were fighting basically each other. And God did that. The Lord did it. Jump down to Judges 7, verse 25. And they captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb. And Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. And then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. But Gideon, even after that victory, still wanted to kill not just the princes, Oreb and Zeb, that were killed in verse 25, but Gideon still wanted to kill the very kings of Midian. For as long as he believed that the kings of Midian lived, there remained a threat to Israel. And so this is where we pick it up today in Judges 8, verse 4. And Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over the Jordan River. And the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. And so Gideon still has his original 300 men that he initiated the battle with, who blew their trumpets and lit their torches and caused the whole army of Midian to go into panic and to flee before them. Gideon still has those 300 men now. At the end of the battle, they already conquered the two princes who were leading that Midianite army. And the 300 men with him, it says they were exhausted. They were just dead tired. And still, they crossed the Jordan in pursuit of these kings. Verse 5 of Judges 8. So he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And the officials of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? So Gideon said, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. And so here, this is a town in Israel, an Israelite town called Succoth. It was an Israelite town near the eastern border of Israel's territory. And they were on their way east to the home base of the Midianites, okay, their capital, to go after and kill the king of Midian. And so on their way, they're in Succoth, and they ask for some provisions. Can you give us some bread? We're tired. We're exhausted. And though Gideon, as you notice, he asked very nicely. Okay, he asked very nicely. He says, please give us loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted. Although he asked nicely, the people of Succoth, you notice, answered rather sarcastically. Okay? He says, well, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? Okay. And so, probably the people of Succoth figured that Gideon only had 300 men, and they looked dead tired. And if Gideon happened to fail in this mission, what would the Midianites come back and do to the people of Succoth? And so they were kind of hedging their bets here. So, well, here are these 300 exhausted men going to the capital, pursuing the kings of Midian. And if the Midianites prevail, they might come back and punish the people of Succoth. And so they said, well, no, we're not going to help you, because are the kings already in Midian already in your hand? No, we're not going to help you. And so what does Gideon do? Gideon says he will vow to take vengeance on them. And he says, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Okay. Now remember how Gideon started. Okay. When he first started, was he this boisterous, headstrong, very confident man? Not at all. He was hiding in a wine press. He wouldn't even come forward when God told him, go save Israel. And he says, oh, I'm from the smallest tribe. I'm from the weakest and the least in my family. I can't do it. And so God had to convince him over and over again by first burning up his offering and then doing the test with the fleece that Gideon said to prove that God is with him over and over again. He was a very timid and a faithless leader. And here he is, vowing that he's going to take revenge on his own people. And these are Israelites now. I'm going to flail your flesh because you didn't help me. This is a very different Gideon now. This is a very vengeful Gideon. This is a very Gideon that seems confident all of a sudden, but not confident in himself, notice. He's confident, not confident in God, but confident in himself. to the point of being almost prideful. He goes on in verse 8 of Judges 8. And from there he then went up to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way as he did to Succoth. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, well, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. So in both cases, in the case of asking for bread, for help from the people of Succoth and the people of Penuel, in both cases, Gideon's own countrymen, these were Israelite cities now. Both in cases, Gideon's own countrymen declined to help them, and he vowed revenge. Now, verse 10. Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, with about 15,000 men who were left of all the army of the people of the east. For there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. So already Gideon had conquered 120,000. Well, the Lord did it. 120,000 men of their army. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Dobah and Jogbehah and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled. And he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all the army into a panic. And so the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, were there with their remaining 15,000 soldiers. Remember, 120,000 had already fallen. And so they apparently did not think that Gideon would pursue them this far east of Israel. And so he caught them unawares. Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian, were captured, which threw all their army, it says, into a panic. It threw them all into a panic. And so then, this again is how Gideon wanted to continue the battle against Midianites. God had already given them the victory, but that was not good enough. He wanted to take more. He wanted more than just the princes. He wanted the kings. He went into their territory and went into the Midianites' territory to capture the kings. Now again, this is a very different way from when Gideon won their previous battles. Previously, remember, Gideon won the battle that God had appointed him to by blowing trumpets, holding torches, and then letting the Lord himself fight the battle before him. Remember? That's how he won the first battle over 120,000. This time, Gideon takes matters into his own hands and actively chases down the enemy into their own territory. No mention, notice, is made of the Lord himself giving them victory. Nowhere does it say the Lord gave them victory. Okay? Nowhere does it say that. The Lord gave them victory in this case. Because it was done on Gideon's own strength. It was done on Gideon's tactical prowess of using the element of surprise to his advantage. Now he does say, verse 7, well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand. You see, that's Gideon speaking. He's just assuming the Lord's going to give him to my hand. It never says the Lord gave him to his hand. See the difference? He's claiming that God's with him when the Lord gives me Zebah and Zalmunna in my hand. But it never says in the Scripture that God himself told him, go pursue the kings of Midian, go into their land, go after them, and capture them. Okay, this was not God's plan for the battle. This was entirely his own. And we'll see why. And so Gideon took matters into his own hand this time. No mention is made of the Lord giving him victory. It was done on Gideon's own strength. And just because they were victorious did not mean that God approved of their actions or their methods. So after the victory, Gideon went on, as he had vowed, to punish the two cities that would not give him bread earlier. So remember Succoth and Penuel? Well, look at verse 13. Then Gideon, this is after they captured the kings of Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, verse 14, and he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men, and he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. Okay, so basically he's flailing them with these thorns, as he had vowed to do. And this is after he got a great victory over their enemies. He goes back to his own people, the ones who didn't give him bread, and he flails them with thorns. Is that the way you celebrate a victory? Is that the way you celebrate a victory that you say God has given you? Is that the way God wants us to celebrate victories? So instead of being thankful for the victory that God had graciously given him, Gideon was filled with pride over what he felt he accomplished on his own. 300 men versus 15,000. That's how many were remaining. And he brought back the kings of Midian, as it says in verse 15. Okay? He came to the men of Succoth and says, Behold, here's the Zebah and Zalmunna that you taunted me about. Here he is. Here they are, both the kings. And it says, he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. What lesson? What lesson does Gideon need to teach the people of Succoth? That you better listen to me next time or else? Okay? Is that the great lesson that he has for his people? You better listen to me when I ask you for help, or else this is what's going to happen to you. See, Gideon also did the same thing to the other city that he vowed things against, in Penuel, verse 17. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. I ask you again, is this the way that you celebrate a victory? Go back to your own people. Okay, yes, they didn't give you bread. Okay? Yes, you're right. They were scared. They were afraid that if you had lost, then the people of Midian would come back and take revenge of them. They didn't help you. But is this the way that God wants you to celebrate your victory? To go back and teach them a lesson? You better listen to me. To go back and kill people for not giving you bread? The people of Penuel? That's what Gideon. This is a very different Gideon than there was at the beginning when we met Gideon. This is a very different Gideon from the one we saw at the very beginning. Gideon, the one who had been hiding in the winepress out of fear of the Midianites. And when God had even told him earlier to save Israel, he said that he couldn't because he came from a tribe that was too small and too weak. And God himself had to assure him over and over again that he would be with him just to get him to go into battle. And he was constantly, this Gideon, the same Gideon, was constantly in fear, and he lacked confidence. The day of the battle, God had to tell him, go down to the camp and listen to what they're saying about your army. And they hear and they talk about this barley loaf coming, and it's the tribe of Gideon. Remember? How many times did God have to assure Gideon he was so afraid? That's the Gideon that God used. But now, this is a very different Gideon now. Now he's gained confidence. But his confidence is no longer in God alone. But his confidence now seems to be in himself. And this self-confidence leads to anger and vengeance, even against his own people. Yes, they didn't help him. They didn't give him bread. But do they deserve death? Apparently so. Apparently so. I'm going to teach them a lesson, he says to the people of Penuel. I'm going to kill the people of Penuel and tear down their tower. People of Israel, mind you. In Romans chapter 12, verse 19, Paul writes, Beloved, never avenge yourself. Read that again. Never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God. If there's any vengeance to be going on, it's to be God is supposed to do it, not yourself. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. But that's not what Gideon did. He, quote, celebrates his victory over the kings of Midian by killing his own people. And that's what happens when he no longer puts his confidence in God alone, but rather in himself. He's filled with pride now. He's filled with anger, which he thinks is justified. Oh, you didn't help me. You didn't give me food. I'm going to teach you a lesson. And that's what happens when your confidence is no longer in God alone, but it's in yourself now because you got a victory. Just because you got a victory doesn't mean God approves. Don't ever mistake a victory for God's approval. There is a difference between fighting the Lord's battles and fighting our own battles and expecting God to bless them. And so often I think we do that. So often we do things that we say are for Jesus or for God, and we just assume God is with us, rather than asking, Lord, do you want me to do this? Lord, show me what you want me to do. There's a big difference between fighting the Lord's battles and fighting our own, and then expecting the Lord to bless them. And that's what Gideon's learned. He went on his own, and he pursued the kings of Midian into their territory. God did not tell him to do that. He assumed the Lord was on his side. And then afterwards, he got that great victory. He goes, I'm going to show those people who didn't help me. See, look what I did. I got these kings that you said I wasn't going to get. I'm going to teach you a lesson. Okay, that's a prideful, self-confident, not God-confident person, even though God gave him victory. So we got to be careful about this. We got to be careful when God even gives us the things that we ask for, that we don't become filled with pride, we don't become vengeful people, angry people. And that's what we are seeing even today among God's people. We think that we are justified in our anger. But is it the Lord that wants you to be angry, or is it just you're angry? Okay. Gideon further shows how different he has become in how he deals now with the kings of Midian. Now look how he treats the kings of Midian. Verse 18. Then Gideon said to Zebah and Zalmunna, where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? And they answered, as you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. So during an earlier battle, the kings of Midian had apparently killed some men who turned out to be Gideon's brothers. Now, under other circumstances, Gideon admits in verse 19 that he would have spared the lives of the kings of Midian. He says clearly, verse 19, as the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. But now, Gideon reveals his own personal vendetta against these kings of Midian. And this appears to be at least one of the reasons why Gideon pursued them so vigorously. This was about his own personal agenda. This was all about his personal vengeance, not God's. God didn't say, take vengeance for your dead brothers. Kill the kings of Midian in retaliation. God did not say that. This was about his personal agenda. But although it is understandable why Gideon would want revenge, since his brothers were killed, it was not part of the mission that God gave him. After all, he said he would have spared them had this not happened. It says, I would have not killed you had this not happened. So he would have, but what made him not spare them? Personal vengeance, personal vendetta. Verse 20. And so he said to Jether, his firstborn, is Gideon, rise and kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Pay attention to what Jether didn't do. Okay, he did not kill the kings of Zalmunna and Zebah and Zalmunna because it says he was afraid. Who does that remind you of? He was afraid. See, Gideon wanted to give his son the honor of killing the Midianite kings, but he was afraid. Just like, if you remember, Gideon was at the very beginning. Gideon was afraid at the very beginning. When we first met Gideon, he was just like his son, afraid to do what the Lord told him to do. And so now his son's afraid to execute the kings of Midian because he's young. The kings of Midian felt it would have been disgraceful to be killed by such a young man. And so they taunted Gideon into doing it himself. Verse 21. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, For as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of the camels. So basically they're saying, the kings of Midian to Gideon, if you're a man, then show it. Don't make your son do it. You kill us. Because basically they would have been disgraceful as exalted kings to be killed by such a young person, such a young soldier. Now the contrast between what we see in Gideon's son and Gideon himself also shows us and reminds us the kind of man that Gideon has become. See, Gideon's son hesitated when it was time to take action. He didn't want to kill the kings. He was young. But Gideon, he killed them immediately. The son showed fear, but Gideon does not. The son showed what we might call weakness. Gideon showed strength. Gideon's son, though, was exactly what Gideon used to be. Hesitating, fearful, weak in the eyes of the world. And that's when God used him mightily. Remember that. It was when he felt weak and hesitating and fearful is when God used Gideon mightily. Now Gideon has become this self-confident, boastful, fearless, strong warrior, which has made him vengeful, impulsive, and more prideful. You could actually say that Gideon was better off being that fearful, weak person that he was before than he is now. Because before, he would only act if God told him to. He would only move if God assured him that he'd be with him. He only did things if God told him to do them. Now he acts on his own strength. And so my question for you this morning is, which is the better Gideon? Which is the better Gideon? The man he was before? And when he was victorious? The man he was before he was victorious? Or the man he became afterwards? Which is the better Gideon? Which one would have been more admired by the world? Oh, the second Gideon. Man, look at the things he did. 300 men. He even went into their own territory. What a brave man. He killed the kings of Zebah. And he showed those people Succoth a lesson, right? Don't you mess with me. If I ask for food, you better give it to me. Give me my McDonald's or I'm going to thrash you with thorns. Boy, he sure taught them a lesson. Which one would have been admired by the world? And which Gideon was more approved by God? See, the Apostle Paul knew exactly the kind of man that God wanted him to be. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul writes, "For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses. I am content with insults and hardships and persecutions and calamities. I'm content when I'm weak. For when I am weak," what does Paul say? That's when I'm strong. Is that the Gideon we see after? Weak? No. Now he's self-confident. Now he's boastful, he's prideful, he's vengeful, he's impulsive. He acts on his own agendas, assumes just God's with him, doesn't wait for the Lord. That's what happens when we don't act out of our weakness, but our own strength. And so when we measure true greatness, do we ourselves look for worldly accomplishments to measure greatness? Do we look for fearlessness in our leaders? Do we look for men of action, men who have strength? Or do we value those who are more fully surrendered to God? That's what we look for. Is that the criteria we look for in true leadership? Men of strength, men of action, fearlessness. Or do we look for who's fully surrendered to God? Who's ready to do his will no matter what? Just surrender to God. God, whatever you want, I surrender to you. I will not move until you tell me to. See, God used Gideon when he felt weak. And yet, though he felt strong after his victory, he just did not realize how weak he actually was. in his supposed strength. In his human strength, he was actually very weak. And we see that at the end of verse 21. It's a small hint of his weakness. Just a chink in his armor in verse 21. Look at verse 21, the end again. He killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Now, why is that significant? Crescent ornaments were symbols of pagan moon gods. And it was a subtle hint of what's to come. You still see Arab people have crescents in their flags and in their emblems. This is a pagan symbol. Why did he take their ornaments? Well, we'll see. And that's already a sign of his weakness, even though he thinks he's strong. And so our second point is that God uses those who are fully surrendered to him. That's the criterion that we all look for in a true person of God, man of God, woman of God, whoever. Are you fully surrendered to his will rather than those who push their own agendas? That's what God looks for. God uses those who are fully surrendered to his will than those who push their own agendas. Remember King Saul? Okay? God says, Samuel said, hey, wait for the sacrifice, and then we will be with you. We'll offer the sacrifice. Well, did Saul wait? No. And so when Samuel came, he says, well, I couldn't help it. I offered the Lord's offerings. And what does Samuel say? He says, the Lord doesn't care about your sacrifice. He cares for your obedience. Are you fully surrendered to him? And that's what our mistake. We think, well, we got to take action here. Because that's what he was thinking. Maybe you don't blame Saul. He says, well, the people were fleeing, the people were losing heart, and the battle was ready to go. And so Saul, he just kind of pushed the agenda a little bit, and he offered the sacrifices. That's what they're there for, waiting for Samuel to come so they can offer the sacrifices. But the prophet Samuel said, God doesn't want your sacrifices. He wants your obedience. He wants your heart that's fully surrendered to him. And that's what we see in the book of Judges, and that's what we see today. Hearts are not surrendered to Jesus. They go on their own ways. They go on their own strength. They want worldly accomplishments. They want worldly acts of leadership. Men of strength, men of leadership, men who are fearless and blah, blah, blah. They don't care about the surrender to God. When that's what God looks for. Now after Gideon's great victory over the Midianite kings, you'll see it get worse. It just goes worse. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, Gideon, you and your son, and your grandson also. For you have saved us from the hand of Midian. You've killed the kings now. Rule over us. Did God say he wanted Gideon to be a king? When did he ever say that? Now, to Gideon's credit, he didn't go with that at first. Israel wanted to make Gideon the king, and his son and his grandson, quote, rulers over Israel. But Gideon tried to quash that sentiment because he knew it was wrong. He knew in his heart of hearts that was wrong. Verse 23, that's a worldly sentiment. Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, rule over us. He knew that was wrong. Verse 23, Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. Who's going to rule over you? The Lord will rule over you. See, after all, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon earlier, God had said to him in Judges chapter 6, verse 8, thus says the Lord, he said to Gideon, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery, and I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of those who oppressed you and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. God rules over the people. God rules over us. Not me, not a man. And to Gideon's credit, when Gideon had his army ready, he also remembered in Judges chapter 7, verse 2. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give you the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. See, you're not saving yourself. That's what God's trying to say. You're not saving anyone. I'm doing the saving. I am your Lord. And so to Gideon's credit, he tried to get them to see it is the Lord who will rule over you. But people always seem to prefer their human leaders more than God. They just prefer their human leaders more than God. And then things only got worse. Verse 24. And Gideon said to them, let me make a request of you, every one of you, give me the earrings from the spoil. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a cloak, and every man threw it in the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments. Remember those? Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. See, an ephod was meant to be only used by a high priest. If you look, remember the book of Exodus, the high priest also had an ephod made for him. Only the high priest was to wear them. And it was to be used for inquiring of the Lord by the high priest. But Gideon apparently wanted one of his own. And remember those crescent ornaments mentioned back in verse 21 when he took them off the kings of camels? They were also used to make Gideon's ephod in verse 26. So sadly, this ephod became a snare to Gideon and to his family and to the people of Israel. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So people apparently worship this ephod, which he was never told to make. Again, he's not doing anything that God told him to do, because he doesn't listen to the Lord anymore. He's doing everything on his own now, because he's the man. He got the great victory. He can do whatever he wants. He can do no wrong. God's on his side. Why did God give him the victory if God's not with him? So that's what we start thinking. God gave us a victory, so therefore I'm authorized to do whatever I want to do. Wrong. He did whatever he wanted to do here, and he built an ephod. And so people worship this ephod as an idol and hoard after it, like a prostitute. And because the kings of Midian were now dead, verse 28, so Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more. And the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. So there you see there was kind of a victory there because God gave them rest. Although it was only temporary, it's 40 years. But 40 years seems like a long time. Some people say, I'll take 4 decades of rest. And the Midianites were subdued because he killed the kings. But this was a mixed victory. It was a mixed victory. Yes, they had rest for 40 years. But then they started using Gideon's ephod as an idol. And even though Gideon said he did not want to be Israel's ruler or king, he sure lived like one. Verse 29, look at how Gideon starts living. He says, remember, this is the guy who says, I don't want to be a ruler, I don't want to be king. Look how he lives now. Verse 29. Jerubbaal, that's Gideon. Remember his name's that Baal contended with him. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Now 70 sons he had, and many wives. Who else in the Bible does that faintly remind you of? Solomon, maybe? Remember, many wives? In fact, he had way more than that. But Only kings and rulers have that many wives. Does God say, marry many wives when you're a king? Have 70 sons? No. He says, a man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his one wife. Polygamy is not sanctioned in God's plan for marriage. Never. But when they did do it, it was done without God's approval, often by men who were rulers. And so he lived like a ruler. 70 sons, many wives. And he also had a son named Abimelech. Now that's significant, because you know what Abimelech translates into? The name Abimelech means, my father is king. How's that? The man who said, I don't want to be king, names his son, my father is king. What happened? What happened to Gideon? He's on his own way. He's doing things his own way. And things only became worse after Gideon died now. You think it's bad now? Wait till after he dies. Verse 33. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal Berit their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. It's a very sad ending, isn't it? See, after God initially gave Israel a mighty victory through Gideon with only those 300 men over 120,000, how could everything have gone so wrong after that? How could everything go so wrong after God did such a great victory through Gideon? And the answer is because we people, and I include myself in there, I'm a human just like everyone else. We are so prone to follow human leaders and human teachers, human ideas, and not God alone. Gideon started off as a nobody. Remember that. He started off as a nobody with no confidence and little faith. And God gave him a miraculous victory over 120,000 enemy soldiers. But then people started to revere the man that God used rather than God himself. That's what our tendency is. Revere the man, not the God who made the man. Revere the leader. Oh, he's such a great teacher. Oh, he's such a great leader. Oh, he's such a great whatever. Politician. Whatever it is. Human leaders. Christian leaders. Whether or not they're Christian or not. Doesn't matter. Human leaders get more glory and allegiance than God himself. Even today, people do the same. We idolize Christian leaders, teachers, we idolize politicians, knowing full well that all human leaders, all of them, including me, are fallible. We're not perfect. Only God himself deserves our full allegiance. For us, we learn from Gideon about the lines that we must be careful not to cross in regards to leadership. For example, what we learn from Gideon and what we should apply to ourselves is that there is a big difference between exhorting people and threatening them. Remember what he did to Succoth and Penuel? There's a big difference between exhorting people and threatening them. There's a big difference between using God's name to glorify him and using it just to justify your own actions. There's a difference between having righteous indignation and just being angry. There's a difference between justice and vengeance. There's a difference between being surrendered to Jesus and just being a leader. There's a difference. And even when you cross those boundaries, you might have some worldly victories. And that's what I think fooled the people of Israel. Oh, God gave them victory. Oh, he defeated the kings of Midian. There was peace 40 years. At what cost? You might have some victories, even though you cross these boundaries, but they are not the victories that glorify God. Whatever we achieve only ends up leaving wreckage, as what happened to Gideon. And you'll see that wreckage next week even worse. It just gets worse. Really bad. And it's so sad because it started off so well when Gideon fully surrendered to God himself. So what's the solution? What's the solution to prevent ourselves becoming like Gideon? Starting off so humble, so obedient, so having fear of the Lord and obedient to Him, to becoming impulsive, vengeful, cruel, unjust. The solution is the same for all of us. Surrender to God alone. Surrender yourself to God alone. Stop idolizing human leaders. Stop idolizing human movements. The book of Revelation, chapter 19. There was an incident where John says, "Then I fell down at his feet to worship him, but this angel said to me, 'You must not do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold to the testimony of Jesus.'" Worship God. Worship God. Don't worship me. Stop worshiping the angel. Stop worshiping the messenger. Stop worshiping the teacher. Stop worshiping anybody except for God alone. You must not do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God. Worship God. And so even the Apostle John was prone to worship this angel who was giving him this message. And the angel rebuked him, says, "Don't worship me. Don't fall down to me. Don't worship me. Worship God." But see, we're all so prone to do this. Only Jesus is perfectly wise. Only Jesus is perfectly humble. Only Jesus is perfectly loving. Worship Him only. Be wary when God gives us victories. Okay? Be wary. Don't get arrogant. Don't become prideful. Don't become self-confident when God gives us victory. When God answers our prayers, we rejoice. We're happy. When God gives us the things that we want, when God gives us a great victory, great, rejoice. But even when we win, we can still lose if we're not careful. And that's what happened to Gideon. It's a cautionary tale. It's very sad what happened to Gideon, who started off so well, timid in fact, and yet he ended terribly, terribly. People started whoring after the effort he made. His family were led astray, and you'll see next week, next Sunday, Judges 9, things just get from bad to worse. There's a difference between fighting the Lord's battles and fighting your own. God uses people who are fully surrendered to His will. Remember that. Always submit yourself to God, whether in victory or in defeat. Surrender to Him. His will, not mine. Just like Jesus said, "Not my will, Lord, yours be done." That's what our posture should be. On our knees, surrender to Jesus. Father, we thank you so much. You are a God that is perfectly humble, perfectly righteous, perfectly wise. And you're so patient with us. You gave the people of Israel 40 years of peace. You didn't have to. And Gideon started off so well, Lord, trusting you alone when he was weak. But then when he became confident, Father, just like so many others, Lord, just like myself, we become arrogant. We become self-confident. We start assuming that we're on our side because we have victory. Father, help us to remember that you're not pleased by our victories. You're not pleased by our sacrifices. You're only pleased by our obedience to you, our surrender to you, Jesus. And so, Father, we surrender to you now. We surrender our will to you, our agendas to you, Father. We want to be your will. And you call us to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors ourselves. And so I pray that, Father, you give us the courage to do that, to share your good news for your glory. Thank you, Father. Pray this all in Jesus' name.